All right, everybody, welcome back. This is The End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu. And today we are discussing one of our favorite TV shows of the last decade or so. I think it premiered about exactly 1 decade ago, namely Damon Lindelof and Tom Perrotta's show, The Leftovers. Adapted from a novel by Tom Perrotta and dealing with the events of October 14th. I feel like they dodged a bullet there by having it be October 14th and not another October date that's been in the news. Kept thinking about that. They're like, well, the events of the 14th. Yeah. Great show, wonderful cast, and yeah, one of our favorites. Michael, when did you first watch The Leftovers? Were you...
I watched the first season as it came out.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then for some reason didn't go back, and then I was working on the road a couple years later and I watched it was all done.
Yeah.
But for some reason I watched and loved it, rewatched the first season, then watched the whole second season, which I loved maybe even more, and then just for reasons that I've never been able to explain to myself, just didn't watch the third season.
Yeah, that strangely mirrors my experience.
Really?
Yeah.
And then I went back recently and did the whole thing.
So you've now seen all 3 seasons.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I had the exact same thing where I watched the first season as it was airing and was honestly like a little put off by just like how dark it gets at times, right? I mean, it's like...
You know, it's funny because I actually had the opposite experience, and I think that I had this experience actually also with Severance.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Where there's a certain tone of show, and certainly the first season of Leftovers qualifies, where it's a great argument for consuming television the way we traditionally did.
Watching it week to week.
Once a week, because like you're rewatching the first season of The Leftovers in like binge form, it really beats you down. Like there is no feeling of
there's
redemption.
there's very little release. There are a few redemptive moments that we'll talk about, but yeah, it is pretty unrelenting.
And you sort of wonder, like, if we consume these things, like it's you know, you're conditioned. Like as a kid, you think you're watching like Full House, you know, no matter what, like bad things happen.
You know that like Uncle Joey is going to be fine.
They're at the dinner table. The music's going to set in. There's a couple hugs, and you're like, this is so ridiculous. But then when you watch a show like Leftovers, like I could really use that right about now, you know, just to make me feel like everything just might be okay.
Yeah. I think that's very true. I had that experience a little bit, although this is the 3rd time I've watched the first season all the way through. I watched it when it first came out, found it a little overwhelming. A couple years ago, went back to it, rewatched the whole show, and actually rewatched the first 2 seasons, just like the structure you described, and absolutely loved it. But like you, for some reason, I put off the 3rd season until I think in the pandemic, maybe, so 2020, 2021. And I thought like the 3rd season, which is shorter, was like just about the best thing that I'd ever seen. You know, and I was like, oh my God, like why did I leave this for
even
3
this
years?
Season, the first season that we're talking about today, when I watched it when it was coming out, I was like, this is a pretty good show. And then when I watched it again, I was like, this might be one of the best shows. This is like,
yeah.
And like I think to the point of this podcast, it occupies, I think, a really interesting position, right? Because it's not, it's certainly not. Obviously, there's a global event, but it's not.
The world doesn't
completely,
end literally.
Yes, it's not completely apocalyptic. It's an apocalyptic event, and I think, at least certainly in terms of the stuff that we've looked at so far, this one feels pretty like the way it might actually go if these events transpired.
Yeah, I think this show, despite having some kind of what we might call magical realist elements, which
increase, right?
Although they're always kept under control, right? Where it's not like someone, I mean, all right, yes, we won't spoil the second and third season because we're going to do future episodes on those as well. But yes, like in the second season, there are things that seem to defy like the laws of nature. In this one, it's more, in the first season, it's like, Patty's having a premonition, and then it turns out she's right. But it's like,
but why don't you just give a little breakdown of what the order of events that transpire here?
Okay, great. So there's an event that happens on October 14th where 2% of the world's population, which is something like 150 million people around the world, with no obvious logical connection between the people that disappear, they vanish inexplicably, all at the same instant. And the show is set on the first episode is set on the 3rd year anniversary of this event, and the world has just been shaken to its core by the fact that there is absolutely no explanation for what's happened. And the show's kind of about the various coping strategies that the characters adopt in an attempt to reckon with this new reality. A couple things for background. So Damon Lindelof is obviously most famous as one of the co-creators of Lost, which wrapped up just a couple years before. I think this is the first show that he ran after Lost. Lost, obviously, contentious show, contentious conclusion, whole final season, kind of not beloved by everyone, but I don't think it's as bad as some people say. But one of the things people really didn't like about it was the solution it offered for what it meant for those people to be trapped on that island or whatever.
Right.
And clearly, Damon Lindelof, could have come and done a show where whatever supernatural event is tormenting a group of characters is like utterly nailed down and completely defined. And with this show, he does the exact opposite. He's like, "Oh, you didn't like an unresolved mystery? Well,
Yeah.
Good news. Here's another one, right?" And he just kind of leaned into the unresolvability of what happens, because one thing I love about the show is we never actually find out what happened. So these people have disappeared. Tom Perrotta wrote the novel a few years before the show came out, and so in the late 2000s, I think 2009, 2010, something like that, maybe 2008. And to me, the novel and the show feel very much like they are about 9/11.
Really?
Yeah, just in as much as with a few key differences, right? Just the way they're constantly talking about the 14th, on the 14th. That reminds me of in the 2000s, the way people would talk about
the importance of remembering.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Like remember, never forget the
people who are gone.
Have you forgotten the great Daryl Worley anthem that I listen to every now and then just because it's so maudlin. Anyway, but do you not agree with that? That's something that occurred to me a lot watching this time, that it's about the way people collectively respond to disaster, to a grief. And it has all the elements we saw after 9/11, except the key difference here is there's no enemy, right? There's not one person you can kind of point to and be like, they did this, and then use that as justification for a jingoistic war or what have you, right? Instead, that absence kind of inverts the field in a weird way, and you see
and it also like puts the oppositions, the forces of conflict that come up in the season that we'll get to, onto entities or institutions that are not responsible for the thing itself in any way.
Exactly.
And so in that sense, it's not similar to 9/11, but in another sense, it's very similar, right?
We invaded Iraq,
right. And so there, in this case though, there's not even like,
but there's
not even like the Bin Laden.
There's no guy hiding in a cave allegedly
span out and to then,
to become
use the justification,
to become kind of a
Right. So
a
now
synecdoche for.
right now what we're talking about is, you are judged and you take your place in whatever camp based on how you've reacted over the last 3 years, and even like what has happened in your personal life can determine all of it, how you view the incident, how you view your life now, and what think the purpose of your life and the life of society is, which is basically what everybody in the show is coping with, right? Like, I mean, I think you just mentioned it, but it feels to me like it is really just like a treatise on grief, from the level of the individual through to sort of the global, but definitely the community of Mapleton, the town.
Right. And
Uh,
this first season is very kind of almost laser focused on Mapleton, which is a sort of Nyack type place. It's like in
mhm.
Westchester or a little bit up the Hudson River, based on certain scenes. I think that's around where they filmed it. I think in one scene you can see the Tappan Zee Bridge in the background. So it's like upstate, but it's not too far upstate. So there's one episode that is set in New York City. There's a couple characters that travel beyond that, but everything is orbiting around Mapleton. And I think what's so
Yeah.
brilliant is that Mapleton is just any town USA. It's not a real place.
Mhm.
It's a sort of fictional, typical American town with teenagers and various people pursuing various careers, different people pursuing different religious faiths, that kind of thing. And yet, the way the show focuses on it, we feel like this town is potentially like incredibly significant.
Right. Or yeah, like it, or like something of an allegory for it. Like it's almost as though it's not, it's presented in a realist way, in the
Yes.
sense that like you see news footage and commissions by the government sort of trying to figure it out, and there's a whole bureaucracy about giving you that there's a
It
benefit that
death
you get
a
if
disappearance benefit if one of your
yeah, departure
departure
benefit.
benefit. Thank you.
Right. And so, but at the same time, it's very interesting, the trick that it manages to pull, because it feels like everything about the rapture, in a sense, which is kind of, the basic way it's looked at. Obviously, certain religious people think it is, certain religious people think it definitely wasn't.
Yeah.
But the idea of people just being lifted, away, the statue, and um the sense is
The
that,
statue.
right, like with
The
the
shades of the
like
postman, right?
yeah,
The
but what ends up
statue
what ends
involved.
up happening when you're watching it is like you 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 are left with the sense that the happenings in Mapleton are far more important than the commissions and the departure
And
benefits.
then
And
whatever's going on in like Westport, Connecticut, or
right,
like
it feels
outside
like a story,
Denver.
right, it feels like a story about Mapleton, which I think really separates it from a lot of other, certainly the things that we've dealt with so far,
Yeah,
right?
but
It's
I think.
very
Oh no, I think
no.
I think the other thing is I think I agree with you completely, and I think what we're supposed to understand also that the show makes clear is that stuff like this is happening in Denver, in Westport,
Yeah.
Connecticut,
Yeah.
in Florida. Like that basically, though what we're seeing seems really significant to us, that's kind of always the case because we have as human beings a sort of main character syndrome, right? Where
Right.
wherever we are, we talked about this like about your anecdote about 9/11, right? Like your suburban Ontario
Sure.
the school is not a target, right? It's like no,
Right.
New York is a target, Washington is a
Yeah.
target, like, but we immediately think, but what if I'm the next target, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's just a so I think the show really does a great job of playing with our own sort of internal need to do by focusing on this one town and not like zooming out and showing us like five other
Right. I mean,
or
one of the things I think is really interesting to consider, that, I'm not really sure what the writers would think, but when you watch it, they purposefully are placing it years after the incident.
3 years, right? The first
When I
season,
watch it, I'm always like, so what happened, do you think?
right?
Like what would you do? Like what would you do if,
It's
like,
like one of my siblings were among the
yeah,
disappeareds.
your brother's just gone, like, how would that work? Like, and I suppose within 3 years you would be taking on a lot of the coping mechanisms of regular grief, in a way. Like,
100%.
otherwise right? Yeah. I mean, but one thing you don't really see, which is interesting, is everybody has a sob story about someone leaving, departure, family
No
member,
one's
what
happy.
have you.
Almost no one's happy.
There's got to be so many people who are pretty happy.
It's like, oh my
Like,
God, my abusive husband is gone or whatever.
exactly, right. And I think I would have, that to me was missing. I would have liked to seen
Well,
somebody
I think there's
where,
there's hints at that. But maybe we should go through some of the main characters and we can kind of talk about how they individually respond to these events.
sure,
And
sure.
that can be a way that we can bring some of these things in without just going through a plot episode by episode plot summary of a
Yeah.
10 episode season. So like the main focus is the Garvey family, right?
Mhm.
And we've got Kevin Jr., the younger Kevin, who's Justin Theroux, who's like the main character in the show. And
Yep.
he's a police officer. Prior to the disappearance, he was a lieutenant. But after some events that transpired in the aftermath, namely his father, Kevin Garvey Sr., going completely insane, he's become the chief. So he's the chief of this pretty well staffed small town police force. It seems like they have like a lot of officers for I don't know how big
I mean,
Mapleton is, 30,000 people.
they may have beefed up law enforcement. I mean, imagine the
Amount overtime hours that were authorized.
yeah. I mean, you're talking about 3 years of the post-departure world. And it's probably pretty wild everywhere.
All caps on overtime have been lifted, etc.
Although it's definitely a type of place where you've got like a contingent of people rightfully being like, we need more social workers, not cops.
Well, that I
People
mean,
are, this is a mental health
yeah, I
crisis.
mean, this show is definitely making a case for that, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
So he's a cop, and in the aftermath of the sudden departure, which is one of the ways they refer to the event in the show, his wife has left him. That's Lori Garvey. She's played by Amy Brenneman, and she has joined a cult. And the cult we'll talk about more in a bit is called the Guilty Remnant. They're one of the most iconic aspects, I think, of the first season of the show. They do not speak. They wear white and they smoke cigarettes whenever they're in public, which is very
Chain smoke them.
Yeah, chain smoke them, which is very troubling. Something about it just. Anyway, before we'll go through the rest of the family and then we'll talk about the Guilty Remnant a bit more. So they have two kids. Their son, who's actually Lori's son by a previous relationship, his name is Tommy. He's in his early 20s, I would say. He's like a college student who has, since the disappearance, the departure, has quit college and has become a kind of follower of a religious guru called Holy Wayne, who is a British black guy who claims he can hug out despair from people and has gathered like a kind of a following, but unfortunately his magical power is fueled by a desire and need to have inappropriate underage relationships with specifically Asian women, it seems. So he has
girls.
Asian girls, right? He has he has like a harem of them essentially.
Yeah.
And Tommy is one of the people that like ferries people who want to be gifted with Holy Wayne's power to him through a series of kind of checkpoints and to various locations. And that becomes his sort of relationship with Wayne becomes one of the running threads throughout the season. The other daughter is Jill, who is a senior in high school, I believe. Was a normal, well-adjusted, good student prior to the sudden departure. Since then, she has become not quite fully goth, but is sort of
certainly jaded.
Yeah, is leading into a dark emo phase, shall
Yeah.
we say. And
Right.
she has a friend, Amy, who lives with them for some reason that's never really explained. She's just staying with the Garveys.
One sort of intuits that Amy doesn't have a family anymore.
But it's not. It's never stated that her.
But it's never stated, and I think this is
that
the
her
first
parents
thing that jumps out.
her parents didn't vanish or whatever.
Maybe they did.
Maybe
right.
they went
But this
crazy afterwards. We just don't know.
right. And this is kind of this is one of the most interesting parts to this whole piece, I think, is that the main family, the Garveys, through which everything runs, in the sense of like Kevin's the cop, Kevin's the main character, the wife is representative of the cult and brings you into that world. Tommy brings you into the religious cult world of Wayne.
the other cult. Yeah.
Right. And then the daughter connects you to this, and we'll talk about it, but a very interesting sort of like um, sadomasochistic youth development that seems very realistic, I think, in terms of the way that the young might react to this. But my point about the Garvey family is this, is that what is really fascinating about the way that they built the story is that they are a family where nobody disappeared,
Yep.
but everyone's gone. You know, not to sound too like hacky, but like,
Whoa.
right, like, so the only person in their sphere that disappeared was, it turns out that Kevin was cheating on his wife.
Well, just having a one-time fling with a random woman he helped after a car accident.
Right, and she departs. But
in the moment of their having sex.
Yes, while they're having sex. And so you have all of these people.
Probably pretty awkward hookup, right?
Right, but you have all these people who like go, in some ways, as far away as possible as they can. The daughter is still in the house, but she's completely detached from her father. The mother has gone to a cult and can't be spoken to.
Well, cannot speak. Actually.
Yeah, cannot speak. Sorry, yeah. And then the son is off. I mean, across the country.
He's in Colorado or Texas or somewhere.
Not responding
we don't really know
to
where.
His father. Right, and I think this is like a really interesting way of not softening the events, but that like to show that the impact is sort of refracted onto everybody, even though not everybody's like husband disappeared in the middle of the night or whatever.
Right, because it's very small. It's only 2% of people, right? Which I think is very smart, right? It's like a tiny minority of people across an age spectrum, right? We see children who disappeared. We see old people who disappeared. We see geniuses, famous people.
I mean, if it's 2%,
mentally disabled people who disappeared.
If 2%, if you name the 50 people in your life, you would consider you're the closest to, right?
That's like
once you get down,
that's one of them.
Maybe one, one of them's gone. So it could be relatively inconsequential, but your whole sense of reality and your whole sense of purpose would be undermined no matter what, simply because the very laws of physics appear to have been like completely stomped over, you know?
Yeah, one thing before we get back and talk about the Guilty Remnant, at one point Kevin's at a bar and a list of celebs who vanished is running along the screen, and I thought this was really funny. It's like it's like Condoleezza Rice, Salman Rushdie, J-Lo, Anthony Bourdain, R.I.P., Gary Busey, Bonnie Raitt, and the Pope.
And so is that deliberate to make it seem
did
like...
I say Shaquille O'Neal also, right? So it's
Shaq Bennett?
Yeah, Shaq is gone. Shaq vanished. Just a couple years of retirement and vanished.
Right. That's a lot of endorsement checks no longer for the O'Neal family.
Well, I mean, maybe they, with AI, they probably have AI Shaq, Hawking.
Sure.
But yeah, I do love the randomness of that group of celebrities. Yeah. But it also makes weird amount of sense. You're like, yeah, I guess, yeah, I could see that. Like, Shaq would vanish, like I don't know why. Throughout the show, you're kind of always trying to figure out if there is a pattern or if there is some logic that you can, and I think there isn't, right? I mean, very deliberately, and I think that's one of the things that makes it great. And I think what you just said about like the way people respond is, even if they aren't directly affected by this, they are, right?
Right.
Much in the way that I think, even if you weren't directly affected by the events of 9/11 or COVID, right? If none of your family died, obviously there are all these knock-on effects of an event like this that just change the kind of atmosphere of being alive.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's why it feels more similar to COVID in a way than 9/11, in the sense of like, in the story, much like COVID, there is this attempt to carry on, right? And so you have this huge break from your reality, which is 2% of the world's population have disappeared. and you're just sort of like blinking, like, what the fuck is going on? And then as time goes on, you're just back at the workaday. But this thing pierces through from time to time. You reassess, I think. I mean, although with like COVID, we obviously didn't in any real critical way properly reassess our
What are you
priorities.
talking about?
But
Like Biden
I
Trump 2 is about to happen.
right.
Like
But I think there are a lot of people that like at some level have been really affected by how clear and present the meaninglessness of our day-to-day venture in the like capitalist project is.
yeah,
And I think that people have felt that for a long time, a long time. And I
obviously.
think
And
COVID
COVID made that more explicit.
it's like the whole return to the office thing
Yeah, yeah. Well,
where it was
well,
like,
you got to understand,
holy
like we
shit.
rented these buildings on
Yes, right.
100-year leases in
Right.
some cases,
And
right?
even
Like,
but and even what people wanted, like you would see online during lockdown, like just want like brunch with the girlies or whatever.
right.
And it's like, yeah, all we are able to do in the aftermath of a disaster like this is to like pretend that the shit that was so pointless that we've been doing our whole fucking lives, which was then torn to pieces by the mismanagement of this illness, that like instead of trying to figure out what meaning might look like, we're just like reappropriating a pretty empty way of existing. And people are suffering accordingly. I mean, I think across the board, most people would say they're more miserable now. They're more less sure of what they're doing and the purpose of it. And this is very similar to what these people end up doing. Yeah, sure, I'm still a cop, but Christ, is being a cop way even stupider
Yeah.
than it was before. I'm sure I'm still a student at the high school, but like I'm gonna go on weekends and like where before I might have just been like getting drunk and having sex with somebody.
Now it's
I'm
like
now
a
like
weird spin the
burning
bottle.
myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like there's this whole element of pain and anguish that goes along with existing now, that but at the same time, all of the wheels, right? So the commission, for example, that they put together looks the same. The conferences that they go to look the same.
Exactly.
Everything is exactly the same. And it, I think, is a huge reason why people are sort of emptied out. That,
Right.
like, if something so incredible can happen, why is everything still the same?
Yeah. And I think that's what the guilty remnant in the show is kind of mainly
Exactly.
obsessed with, right? So the guilty
Yep.
remnant, let's talk about them before we get on to the rest of the characters. They're led by this woman, Patty, who is played by Ann Dowd, who is amazing, like one of the best
Yep.
actors in the show. And she doesn't even speak until like the 7th episode, right? She's just a menacing presence. And what they seem to do is they target people that they think have a specific reason to feel dissatisfied, either because they had someone who departed from their life or because they had something else that happened at around that time that has left them in the state that you're describing, like unable to kind of continue functioning as if this didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So one of the people that they focus on, played by is Megan Abbott, who is played by Liv Tyler, and we learn later on in the season, and I think this is shown more explicitly in the second season, that her mother died the day before the sudden departure.
Yeah.
So her grief was completely usurped.
Yeah.
Like she's like, oh my God, my mom's dead. And it's like, oh, 150 million people around the world. Van, it's kind of like just to go, I'm not going to keep going back to 9/11, but I think like this happened with 9/11 too, right? Remember Aaliyah? She died in a plane crash, like I forget, like a week, 10 days before 9/11, and it was a big deal. And then 9/11 happened, and it was like, oh well. Remember Gary Condit, the congressman who was like under investigation because one of his interns was murdered, and it was like, did he do it? It was a kind of OJ type, it was like Clinton because there was an intern.
So he must have breathed a real sigh of relief.
Well, I think he'd already resigned from Congress at that point. But yes, definitely. But that was like the story that was just tearing up the news. And then 9/11 happened. It's just like poop. Yeah, I guess that happened with COVID too. Kobe died, right? Like
Oh yeah,
couple weeks. I think in January. So it was like
it was January.
It was a month or so before.
It was when like rumblings.
Yeah.
Something's going on.
But we were still fully just living our lives. But like, I feel like a little that got a little bit. That might have been a bigger deal if there hadn't been a global pandemic. Certainly, there are other events like this. I had friends that died not of COVID around that time, and it was really sad. But you also felt doubly bad because you're like, oh, you died, and like no one's gonna focus on that now, because this other thing's happening. So I kind of get their ideas. Like, this woman's a target. We can get her to join our cult, and like the point of the cult, as they say, is very simple. They're just like, they just want people to like remember what happened and to actually think about whatever. They don't have like a dogma. They're not saying like. They don't have like they just think that it's wrong, like you said, that people have just moved on and attempted to keep living their lives as they did before, when this totally out of nowhere event happened that utterly altered the landscape of reality. And it's stupid. It's stupid to just be like, well, anyway, back to the conference. Oh, Bob was going to present how he vanished. Well, Steve, you're up next, right? Like, just this kind of...
Right, and most people in opposition to them, like, what they're objecting to is the like piercing through of the meaninglessness of their lives. And so, because like what is interesting about the show, I think, is that, and I think again, like, we don't have to keep harping on it, but what makes it similar to the COVID thing is like people do cling to like anything that they have, because if they don't have, you know, the fun like anniversary with the whole town, that then gets interrupted by the guilty remnant who are like reminding them in a worse way, in an unfair way, to people trying to process and grieve as a community, then like they're also demonstrating that like what you're doing is pointless, and people
don't like to be reminded of that. Yeah,
they, especially when something like this, you know, has happened, you know. And like that's one of the things about the show that is interesting, is that like very rarely, and this is one of the, I think, not the failings of the show, because I do like it so much that I will apologize for some things, but there's very little about, because I'm think about how I would react, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, the thing that would paralyze me is, how do you not think that anything else could then happen at any given time? Like,
well, and there are some people that do think that, and I think that
there's the people who are like, but Nora Durst, who I think is probably the next character.
Yeah, we got to talk about Nora.
Yeah, but like, she's confronted with the possibility of it happening again 3 years after this, and she's like, "You think it might happen again?"
And like, as if she
well,
had...
why wouldn't? Yeah, like as if her of all people. Why don't you explain her? Like, as if Nora Durst of all people,
right,
would not have confronted that maybe this isn't over completely.
Yeah, I mean,
and that is also like very similar to COVID, because of course even we speak of it like it's in the fucking past tense,
right? And there's like 350 people dying like
and
every
it's
day,
raging. But like, people almost can't. Not only do we feel like the social institutions aren't able to cope with accepting that it's still going on, and don't want to, whether it's for profit or whatever. People don't want to act like it's still going on. It's fucking incredible.
Yeah. Totally. So Nora Durst is amazing. It's played by Carrie Coon, the greatest actress of all time, and
the hottest actress,
the most attractive person.
She's the most attractive person of all time, probably.
I think so.
Yeah.
But unironically, I think so. But she's
amazing in this show, man.
She's so good. It's like, well, she and Justin Theroux are both so incredible. It's like, they're so good at going from normal to unhinged on like in a way that doesn't feel at all hammy. Like, it feels
in a way that feels like it's 3 years after it happened.
It's like exactly how people lash out or like freak out. Her family, her husband Doug, and her two kids, Jeremy and Aaron, who were little kids, like preschoolers, they all disappeared from her dining room on the day of the sudden departure, while she was being, as we learn later, she was yelling at them because they spilled orange juice on her phone. Yeah. Like, she was like, I told you to use two hands on the cop. And she's like trying to answer this call about a job that she's trying to get.
Yeah.
And when she turns back, her family are gone. And there's no explanation. So she's a kind of a little bit of a celebrity in the town because her whole family
Yeah,
disappeared.
tragic figure slash celebrity.
She's the
Um,
featured speaker at the commemoration, unveiling of the statue that ends the first
right.
episode.
And
And
like kind of object of fascination. Like the kids are kind of obsessed with her.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, wow,
they,
that's she must be nuts, you know?
yeah, yeah. She's so twisted.
Well,
Um,
this is like a great example of the show just having no glimmer of hope is that like not only did everyone go, they went while she was freaking out on them. So like they didn't even have like a it wasn't even like something to remember well. It's like she's getting upset in this trivial way and then her
and then,
family's
then
gone
they're
forever.
just gone for.
Yeah.
And her brother is the other last main character, and that is who's a Episcopalian. I forget what denomination. It's not important. He's a priest, but not the kind of priest. He's not a Catholic priest. He has a wife, and he is on a one-man crusade to remind everyone via
Truly one man.
via pamphleting that the people who disappeared were not good people. And this is
Right.
not the rapture. They were not some. This is not some holy act of God. This is something else. He offers no, in true conspiracist fashion, he offers no counter theory. He's just like, your religious theory is wrong, which is great because he's the religious guy who's like, this is not the rapture, which is
Yeah.
so weird. He is like maybe the best character. I don't know. There's so many good characters in the show, but his reaction feels both so nuts, but so like, yeah, like I could see a guy being this,
Well, it's also
becoming this unhinged, and like
it's also really it's interesting with him because he is religious and his so the lens through which he would see this would be rapture-esque, right? But he can only digest it through the moral lens of his sort of standardized religious view. So he's like, it can't be the rapture because this guy was a degenerate gambler. It can't be a
this
rapture
guy
because this
cheated on
guy
his wife.
cheated on his wife. And but like
All of this
we don't
stems.
actually
All of this stems though from the fact that when the departure happened, a driver departed, and that car crashed into his car, rendering his wife comatose. She's
Yeah.
alive. She has minimal detectable brain activity.
Yeah.
She's in
no bodily
a
function.
permanent vegetative state. I feel like there's a little
Yeah.
bit of the Terry Schiavo case in the background
Yeah.
there.
That's right.
And he's devoted to her, and his church attendance has dropped dramatically, I think, since the sudden departure and since he took on this crusade of like, it's not the right. It's sort of diverted his attention from. There's that one dialogue he has with the guy who sneaks in when his wife is off, like getting a pedicure or whatever, to get his kid baptized. Because since I think religious faith has dropped dramatically since the sudden departure, which is interesting. I mean, I think the tendency after disasters is for people, at least temporarily, to go back to church and things like that.
Feel like I would find God very quickly.
But maybe 3 years later, you would have been like, oh,
Maybe.
actually, this didn't work. Like
I think I'd probably be like, oh, so the unexplainable can be real.
yeah. I mean, no, I mean,
You know,
exactly.
it wouldn't be a time to walk away, I don't think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. Well said. Let's talk about a couple of the like major themes. So we touched on one. One is religion, right? We have these examples of the guilty remnant who are kind of forming an alternative religion that's basically commemorating the fact that the world is effed and there's nothing to be done about it. We have Matt, who has this weird counterintuitive religious like reaction that we just discussed, and then there's Holy Wayne. What do you make of like the Holy Wayne character, who's like a more traditional kind of, feels just like he's a con man, but
it feels like he's a comment. It's also
but he also sort of is able to like foresee the future. It's
well, this is the thing that I think they do really well in a few different places, mainly Wayne and
Kevin Staff.
Kevin, who we will probably
Kevin Senior,
close.
who is great.
We'll talk about both
Yeah.
Kevins.
Oh, both
like
Kevins. Yeah.
in terms of and it applies to all three of them, but starting with Wayne, is like when you first see the show, you're kind of like, if you're going in and you haven't seen the show at all and you see the way that Wayne is portrayed, you might think that's probably a con man, but it's not really made explicit, right?
Yeah.
And so, because what happens is this congressman and apparently a bunch of people of different, positions have been paying to come see this guy, who basically claims that he can hug you and your pain goes away, which would be a very valuable commodity given that the pain can't go away, which is what we find out.
And there's no explanation for it, right?
Right. And so, obviously it's like, wait, what am I seeing on screen? Is this fleeting? Because the guy who is played by the actor who plays Buddy Garrity in Friday Night Lights,
yes,
he is like, I feel better.
Yeah. Everyone who does meet with Holy Wayne that we see,
right,
is helped by him. However, temporarily.
What's really fascinating about the way the show starts is that Wayne is used as potentially like, hey, maybe there are all these dots that are going to be connected, and maybe there is a redemptive path. And weirdly, it's through this Wayne guy, this British dude who's living in the hills of like Ruby Ridge or some shit.
Yeah.
Right. And are we going to have to like excuse his, pedophilia behavior with these young women if he actually can save the world? And then, as they do with some of these other elements, whenever the situation gets broadened so that you get some perspective about what is going on in the world, right now you just see this microscope on Wayne and his flaws, but his capabilities and his burden, and he knows he's going to die and he's setting himself up as this martyr and all this stuff. And then it just goes to like an FBI, like a Fed.
Yeah, there's this.
And he's just like, oh, these are a dime a fucking dozen. Oh, another guy claiming he can save the world so he can, have sexual relations with underage women. This is like a common phenomenon, which probably, not only tragically is one now, would probably actually take place. You would see a proliferation of these cults. And then you start to piece together that actually he is not anything like he says he is. And it's kind of the same way with the guilty remnant.
Exactly.
Right?
Well,
that all of this is happening everywhere and none of it actually matters, although it's all very important to individuals and families.
That's
right.
Right. Yeah. And that's how things are already in life, right? I mean, we have, like I was talking about at the beginning, like we have this human need to see what's happening to us and to the ones we care about as being like overly significant, when in fact everyone feels that way. Right? It's like I'm unique, and our human capacity is that we all feel this way. So it's like we all feel unique at the same time.
Right, which is why
so our uniqueness is in fact our least unique aspect of us.
Nora becomes such a dominant character because she basically is set up as like, she has the trump card of having dealt with just more
personal loss than almost anything.
Right. And so it sets up her entire worldview. Also, interestingly, she works for the bureaucracy that deals with families and people who have had departures.
And that entails her going and taking surveys where she asks this checklist of 120 something questions.
Right. And so in terms of the normal and unhinged, this is illustrated probably best when, there's so many fucking amazing moments in this show, but when she hires, she's a workaday. She's going and visiting with people and helping them qualify for benefits.
Yeah, she's got a 9 to 5. She's normal.
And then they just have this whole sequence where she hires a sex worker, and the way they set it up, it's like, oh, she's gonna have some sort of crazy sex with a sex worker because she's sad and lonely. Okay, fine. But no. She fucking curveball, like, and I don't know about you, I did not see this coming at all.
Yeah.
She just goes into this chest where she has a bulletproof vest, puts it on, and has the sex worker fucking shoot her from like a few feet away so she can like feel like she's dead for a second.
Yeah.
And this is all while she's like kind of softly starting to flirt with Kevin and see if he like wants to go on a vacation spur of the moment. But that's kind of like what brings them together is that they both look at each other and they say, we're not okay and we're not ever going to be okay. Um,
Yeah.
and and they sort of hide that in their romance, but the daughter has also this cool thing where Nora, when she first meets the daughter, lies about having gotten rid of her gun. She carried a gun around.
Which
And
was the gun she used.
right, and the
But
daughter
but you also
very
sort of think that it's like it's so that she can just kind of like end it all if she
well,
gets to
sure.
that
I think that's
point.
exactly what the implication is, and the
Yeah.
idea of this daughter who basically is like looking for any glimmer of hope because there's something very sweet about her, like
Yeah.
underneath the
Margaret
exterior.
Qualley plays the
Yeah,
daughter.
she's fantastic too. And
Yeah.
but she like sneaks into Nora Durst's house.
After they've started to date
Yeah,
and
and
Nora has
finds
come
the
over for
gun.
dinner and is like, I got rid of the
Right.
gun.
And
Like,
lies about the gun.
I'm
Yeah, get rid of the
normal
gun.
now.
Yeah. And she
She finds the gun
like breaks,
in a sorry game under her
yeah.
kid's bed.
And she like breaks down because it's proof that like
There is no hope. You can't get better.
nothing's gonna get any better. And like I think it all they do such a good job as we get into the next seasons in future episodes, we'll talk about it, but like they really do they make it clear that Kevin is the crux of the show.
Yeah, I think a lot of the
But
side characters drop off to some extent. Nora and Kevin really move to the front, and
right.
we see less of Laurie. We see much less of the daughter. We see much less of the
Right.
son. And the first season is based on the novel, and the second
Yep.
season and third season are written, but with Tom Perrotta, but
Yeah.
as kind of expansions of
But
the
why don't we
universe.
but why don't we talk about Kevin for a bit because he really does it's important because he really does control season 2. I mean, it really does start to become primarily about whatever the fuck Kevin is or
Is
knows
happening to
or
Kevin. Well, a couple
yeah.
things about Kevin that jumped out at me is his relationship to animals is really interesting. And I think the
Yeah.
use of animals in the show is brilliant and fascinating. I don't have a totalizing reading on it. But one of the issues is since the sudden departure, a lot of dogs have gone feral. So they're just these packs of feral dogs that are roaming around. And it doesn't statistically make sense, like 2% of people having their... But it's like, since the departure, people are just like, I don't want to care for this dog. Like, we meet one character, Kevin tries to bring the dog back or like tell the woman her dog died. And she's like, I don't care. It's my husband's dog. He's gone. Like,
Yeah.
I haven't seen him in 3 years, And Kevin, like, is having these night sleepwalking sessions where he goes out and he joins this weird guy, Dean, who seems like he's not real. He almost seems like he's a hallucination that Kevin's having, except we see him interacting with a bunch of other characters who are like,
Right,
who's that
right.
guy? Like,
and that continues like throughout. You don't know if people are really there or not with Kevin.
Right. And he doesn't have any memory of this, but apparently every couple weeks he goes out at night with this guy and they just hunt these feral dogs and kill them en masse. Right? And
you don't know if Kevin's at first it's like, is Kevin's problem he's on certain medication or not on certain medication?
Yeah.
It's
especially given the fact
that that's the problem, right? And they really slow roll that, like, and this obviously brings in Kevin Senior.
Right, that's where I was going next. Like,
talk about it a little bit because then you start to think, is this?
I think another great.
hereditary?
I think another great aspect of the show is that the 9th episode of the season. There's 10 episodes in the season. Is a flashback to what happened to all these characters on the day of the departure, right?
Yeah.
So we see what Kevin Senior was like before this happened.
Yeah.
And
Why don't you explain a bit? Because I don't think we've talked about him.
So he's very straight-laced. He's the chief of police, older guy, very like no nonsense. They have a party for him before the departure, and he's like, Kevin gives this very moving speech where he reads this famous Stephen Crane poem about, I exist, a man said, the universe, and the universe said, however, that has not inspired in me any sense of obligation, right? This idea, this sort of proto-existentialist idea from Stephen Crane in the 1870s. But, and it's very moving. It's a nice speech. And Matt, the priest, gives a really lovely toast to how he's the man of the year. And there's this moment where Kevin Sr.'s like, yeah, that was a great speech. I almost felt like you meant it. Like he kind of sees that Kevin, even before the sudden departure, is like a broken person in some way.
Yeah.
He has this great life. They live in this beautiful modernist house with a pool. His Lori is a therapist. She's very wealthy. They're very successful. They have these beautiful kids. One of them's in college. One of them's in... But there already are these cracks in their relationship, right?
Yeah.
Kevin's been secretly smoking, and Lori's like, why don't you just be honest about it? And Kevin, they're having... Even before the departure, there's a deer. This is the other animal thing. There's a deer that's running amok in the city of Mapleton. It's like breaking into people's houses. It's like tearing up their walls with its horns. It goes into the school, scares all the kids. I think it's a monster. And Kevin's like, oh, we should get some tranquilizer darts and like save the deer. And so he's kind of like presented as this like bleeding heart a little bit, where he like wants to save. And then this is contrasted with later when he's sleepwalking, murdering dogs throughout the, you know, it's like this, it's this very weird, like, I mean, I think one of the things is with the deer, another thing happens, a manhole cover blows up. Like, a few events happen right before the sudden departure.
Right.
That it reminds me a little bit of that old wives' tale about, like, animals knowing about a disaster before it happens, right? Which I think...
that was my take on it. That's what I thought was...
Yeah, I think...
That they somehow contain some information about
I think with earthquakes and things like that, they do sense the tremors. They are more attuned to, like... They have...
Oh, right. Okay.
Like, I think there is some empirical basis for this. I haven't read the studies on it, you know?
Sure.
But it's certainly this idea that, like, the natural world is more in tune with itself, that we as humans have become alienated from. Which ties in with the theme of the show.
In a sense, like the idea of whatever it is happened, or whatever elements of magical realism that exist, first time you're really confronted with them outside of like these weird small moments with Kevin Jr. is Kevin Sr. is presented as having had like a psychotic break.
Yeah.
He hears voices.
He's literally having conversations with entities or people that are not present.
And he is adamant that he is not crazy and that he is actually talking to somebody. And
that it's a kind of revelation. And
then there's this teasing of his son, that his son is also
a part of this.
And Kevin,
and is in fact the Messiah, like maybe.
Right. And Junior is just like, wow, my dad's really lost it.
Yeah,
even though
let's get him back
he's also losing it.
Time to go to bed, old man. And I'm also going to go to bed and then wake. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right.
It's like...
and so you sort of see like Kevin Jr., Justin Theroux, like descend more into that world as the season goes on, which then obviously leads to the big... Why don't you talk about how this actually wraps up a bit?
Well, like the turning point of the season is in one of these sleepwalking episodes, Kevin kidnaps Patty, the leader, with the help of Dean, the dog hunting guy.
Leader of the guilty remnant.
And he wakes up in his car, totally unaware of where he is, and he's at this cabin that he used to go to as a kid in a remote part of upstate.
In Cairo, or
Cairo, but it's
Cairo, but it's spelled Cairo.
Yeah, and New York, and Dean is like, well, we got her here, you know, time to kill her. Like, you want to end this, like we want, and like
his partner, the dog shooting partner, is also there,
and is much more familiar with Kevin than Kevin understands, or than we as an audience understand. We're like,
he gives him his truck at some point.
Yeah. He's like, that's yours now. I don't need it anymore. And we're just like, what's going on? And he's having this whole second life where he's like best friends with this random guy who no one can find. The guilty remnant lady's like, you're nobody. Like, you have no social security number. You're off the grid completely. And he's like, and so Dean is like, let's just kill her. And Kevin runs out in the woods. There's another motif where he keeps losing his shirts. His cop shirts, they're just gone. And he goes into the woods as he's debating what to do about this kidnapping that he didn't realize he'd done, and he just finds that his shirts are like nailed up on trees throughout the woods. He earlier did a major racism to the South Asian laundromat, being like, "You keep losing my shirts," and like drunkenly like robbed them of someone else's shirts, presumably. Right. Right. So is this like? Is he just? Another thing is he just blacking out? Is this just like blackout drunk behavior? That's like a logical explanation, but it also feels like.
Well, I mean, I think that like ultimately, as you get to the end, where now he's kidnapped Patty, right, and because there is still this like bleeding heart element to him, where everything bad that he does when he's blacked out, he's like, I didn't do that. Basically, it's like, what's going on?
Not
I'm a good
guilty
person.
by reason of insanity. Yeah,
right. And so when he gets to this, he's like, Dean is like, we have to. What the fuck are you talking about? We have to kill this person.
We drove into the edge of the cliff. Like,
and he then, because he's the good guy still, is like,
no, I'm gonna free her.
Right. So he starts to try to reason, and he does it pretty effectively, and they have quite a fascinating exchange.
And then she chants like, this Yeats poem at him that's so intense and weird. And you're just like,
and she's like, but what she's articulating is like, I don't give a fuck what you say. I don't give a fuck what you do or what happened.
I'm destroying your life.
I'm going to ruin your life if you bring me back. So you got to kill me. And he's like, come on, no. Right?
He's like, I'm the good guy. I'm the hero.
Right. And meanwhile, he's calling Nora.
And leaving a message that's disrupted by bad connection. That she never really receives that we know.
You get the sense that things are fraying sort of between the nuclear Garvey family of Nora and the daughter.
Well, the daughter has left. Daughter has disowned her friend Amy and has moved in with the guilty remnant people.
Right.
So she's joined.
And so all of this is now falling apart, and he has this decision to make, and he's trying to get out of it, and he's trying to figure out how. And then Patty,
he frees her. He unshackles her.
Yep. He does the right thing. He's going to deal with the consequences. And he's actually
like, you're not going to ruin my life. I'm going to confess. Like, you can't. I won't give you that power. And so she just grabs a shard of glass and just takes herself off the table in the most horrifying way imaginable.
Right. And so now she's dead, and they have no choice, I guess.
Really, well, Kevin calls Matt, the priest, who hates the guilty remnant, has been trying to like disrupt them for his own reasons, and Matt just like helps him bury her. It's like, I'm not going to say anything.
Right. And let's just leave this behind.
Yeah.
But then when you finally get back, what has also been transpiring the whole time is that Tommy, who is
he's been ferrying this pregnant young Asian woman or girl.
Right. He's a follower of Wayne, but he is figuring out that Wayne is
a fraud.
Fake.
Yeah.
And he is dealing with that, and
he meets another one of Wayne's followers who has
so he's been told that the pregnancy is so important. You briefly get the idea at the beginning of the show that there might be this like weird prophet child,
Messiah child,
yeah. But of course, there's a bunch of these poor girls who are carrying these children, and none of it means anything.
None of them are Paul Atreides. There is no
and the young girl then leaves.
She bails,
And at this point, Tommy's left with the baby, and despite being adamant that he's not going to re-engage his family and his father, he drops the child off at his dad's house.
Kevin's.
And at this moment, as you get to the end of the season,
the guilty remnant's final plan is they drop off these duplicates.
Yes,
which are like an item we see throughout the season. Nora sees one at a conference she goes to about the sudden departure, which are these bodies that you can buy that are like synthetic duplicates of your lost loved one, just so that you have something to bury in a coffin.
Yeah. Which is good. It's an interesting way of doing it because it's not so sick that like. And you can put them in your house for decoration so that they're there.
If you want.
It's like, it actually feels kind of like this might happen. Like the practical, to have some weight in the ground, I think could matter to some people. So it's kind of but then they like, explain
the guilty remnant they steal the photos from people from the houses who departed and have duplicates of all the townspeople made at enormous cost. These things are like $30,000 each, right? Although I think the ones that Nora gets dropped in her house look like the cheaper models. They're not as they're not as fully realized as the one she sees at the conference. But and this causes a riot. People go nuts because of this, and they burn down the house. Of
I
the
mean, if I had a
remnant.
departure and
you
I
came down
home,
one morning and your departed wife or whatever,
I would burn that fucking house down in a second.
Yeah, I think it's realistic also. And Kevin comes back after having essentially not murdered, but caused the death of the Guilty Remnant's leader, to find that the Guilty Remnant people are just getting like, murdered in the street, right? Someone's throwing rocks at their heads, and so, it's just
there's a fire.
A fire takes over. His daughter and ex-wife are in the house. The ex-wife gets out as he's coming up, and she finally breaks her code of silence and says, "Jill." She screams the daughter's name to Kevin, which he rushes in, manages to find her and save her. Inside the house, very interesting, there's a guy who's just like meditating as he burns, sort of a Heaven's Gate energy, where it's like, this is the end for me, I'm accepting it. There's another guy who's like trying to take advantage of one of the women, and it's very dark, right?
But meanwhile, from Nora's side, when Nora gets the duplicates, she doesn't charge out. She just has a full-on fucking breakdown.
She screams and is just
she just screams and falls
and
over.
then sits with them at the table.
Yes.
Which is like,
and so you get the sense
sad.
that it's like she's completely snapped and is completely done.
And she needs to leave.
And so on the heels of the riot and the fire and saving the daughter, and
she goes to bring Kevin a letter that says, "I'm leaving. I have to get. I love you, but this isn't. I need to get out of here." And at his porch, she finds the baby left by the son. Also, one thing we didn't mention: Kevin randomly at the diner on the way back goes into a bathroom stall, and who's there but Holy Wayne, who's been shot somehow by whom we don't know, and he's just dying.
Yeah.
And he says, "I'll give you one wish, Kevin," or whatever, and don't say it out loud. And then he's like, "Granted," and then he just dies. And then the FBI burst in,
and you kind of think like this must be some sort of setup for the next season, which
sort of is.
We'll get to.
I don't know.
Right. But like then, what I love about the last episode is like so then the kid is there on the porch, and Nora sees the kid, and like
she has a reason to live.
Yes, she now has a reason to live, and they all end up back there, and the daughter has forgiven them, and the daughter is into it, and Kevin sees the kid too, and
even
it's not
the random dog that he tried to tame that was just totally vicious and it's come along and it's friendly now.
What I really like about it is that it doesn't feel particularly hopeful. But instead, what it feels like to me is that in this society that has like endured this thing, and with individual people who have endured these things either together or are trying to exist with new people, that sort of eternal and almost unconditional forgiveness is granted silently.
Yeah.
That you don't need to tell me where you were, and you don't need to talk, obviously that gets more complicated, but there is this notion with this
child
bringing them together that
we're just going to set whatever was going on aside for now and move forward together.
Right. Because it's hard enough to like exist with everything that we are.
Yeah.
And that's one of the fascinating parts of the show, is that while there are these tensions and there are these like this very like deadened feeling, there is this very real humanity of the one thing that connects everybody still is the realization that everybody has gone fucking through it.
Yeah. And that nobody knows the answer, that there is no, I guess that's one of the cruxes of what Patty says to Kevin before she kills herself, which is that she's like, why we're still here. Right. And the reason we're still here is we've got to carry each other, to quote Bono, the ultimate thinker of, but we've got to like look out for each other because we're all effed. Right. Yeah. And that the departure, maybe more than anything else, just kind of reminds us of that on a big level. Great show. I mean, wow, what a good show. And we will definitely return to cover season 2 and then eventually season 3 in a future episode. Is there anything else you wanted to add? I thought that was a really nice way to wrap it up, Michael. Anything else?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, I think that's like, it's fascinating to have this strand of, considering what ends up happening in the show, to leave the first season that is like so bleak in this way. It's kind of the first time you're kind of like, you have a little bit of a smile, like, okay,
Yeah.
but I do, I think that's like, again, to draw back just to bring it all around to those two comparisons that we made about 9/11 and COVID, that like, it does wear off,
Yeah.
and so like,
Well, at least the novelty of it does, right?
well, and like the shared sense of, people will tell you about 9/11 all the time. Like in the early aftermath of it, there was this sense of like, and obviously it went to some pretty bad ends, but like there was a sense of togetherness. I mean,
like, how you doing, buddy? I'm okay. Like, good. Just
right.
checking in on you. And with COVID, we clap for carers, while.
Well, but yes, but like even not facetiously, like being in New York when tens of thousands of people were dying, like there was this like, shared sense of an experience.
Oh yeah.
That unfortunately, really, and as we'll find out in the next episodes about The Leftovers, like really gives way to just this craven hollowness that we, the hollow way that we still...
and appears as certain forms of madness, right? Whether societal or cultural or individual. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. So yeah, that's great. So what are we talking about next week?
Next week we are going to talk about something a little more recent, at least the television show version.
Yeah.
We're going to be hitting, I think, the somewhat popular.
Yeah. I've seen a fair
Three Body Problem, which is the comeback effort of the famously shamed creators of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, Weiss and Benioff are back. They're back.
They were exiled to Netflix, like the uncultured buffoons that they are.
Yeah, the Siberia of streaming services,
right?
I guess.
Which we'll touch on, but boy, do I wish Three Body Problem was on fucking HBO. But
it would be much better. It's true.
It's the first novel of. I've only read the first novel, but the first installment of a trilogy, a sci-fi trilogy. That the Three Body Problem, the novel, the book itself is fucking unbelievable. We are going to keep them separate for purposes of not just doing an episode that compares the book to the show, but we're going to hit just the TV show. And then eventually, I think, Stu, once I've read the book,
we'll come back.
The book,
maybe we'll cover the trilogy. I'm not sure how we'll do it, but this is something that I've been meaning to read for a long time, and I've just started watching the show today, and I have some thoughts already. And I'm sure we'll have more to discuss next week. In the meantime, remember to subscribe, share the pod with your friends, follow us on Instagram at End of the World WMS, and good vibes. So Three Body Problem next week, and until then, this has been the End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael,
and I'm Stu, and we'll see you real soon.